Hello, my name is Stephanie Babbitts, and I am the project director for START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities project at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. Today's webinar is Inclusion, Input to Action, SEPAGs as Catalysts for Inclusive School Districts and Communities. The START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities project is a collaboration between the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and SPAN Parent Advocacy Network.
Our workshop goals today include review the law related to inclusion of all students, identify barriers to an inclusive setting, understand how data storytelling can start conversations, and discuss how to extend inclusion beyond the classroom.
Let's start with the legality of inclusion. The federal law that pertains to it is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA is the nation's special education law. It gives rights and protections to students with disabilities. According to federal IDEA, students with disabilities should be educated to the maximum extent possible alongside their non-disabled peers. Removal may only occur when education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. It's important to note that there is no mention of the word inclusion in IDEA. Least restrictive environment, or LRE, is the term that is used in IDEA that encompasses what we refer to often as inclusion. During an IEP or individualized education program meeting, all placement decisions should begin in the general education setting. The IEP team may consider removing a student only if they cannot be appropriately supported in the general education setting, and the IEP team must offer an explanation of why removal is necessary. That explanation is written into the IEP. Inclusion benefits all children. It provides meaningful friendships, increased appreciation and acceptance of individual differences, increased understanding and acceptance of diversity, respect for all people, prepares all students for adult life in an inclusive society, and all students' needs are better met with greater resources for everyone. So let's take a moment for a reality check on inclusion in New Jersey. In New Jersey, approximately 45% of all K-12 students with disabilities are educated inclusively. Nationally, it's 65%. New Jersey is among the states with the highest levels of segregation in schools by race as well as disability. Only 6.8% of children with intellectual disabilities are educated inclusively. Nationally, that's at 17.9%. New Jersey ranks last in the United States, 50 out of 50, on its delivery of education in the least restrictive environments.
So now we're going to talk about the barriers and the impact that they have on inclusion and students. So the barriers prohibits or limits access to opportunities, education, social engagement. What is the impact of those barriers? So, and you can see that we have the silos up top there, and that's because we often hear people talk about general education and special education are in silos. That's not what we want, right? We want everybody together. So let's start with physical barriers. A physical barrier would lead to a lack of participation, such as a ramp to get into a building that has stairs. The mindset barrier would be a lack of understanding, and that might be due to someone who just is not thinking about disabilities, for maybe they have no context or experience, or at least they don't realize that they do. On the next slide, we're going to talk about solutions. So we'll continue with our barriers and impact, but then we will get into the solutions on these. Misinformation, barrier of misinformation would lead to a lack of opportunity, such as someone in the IEP meeting and having a conversation that isn't actually about starting in the general education classroom, right? That's misinformation. If they're not having the conversation about starting in the gen ed classroom, maybe there's a lack of opportunity for that student. And then finally, the climate and culture as a barrier, and how would that impact someone's experience in school? And that impact might be a lack of acceptance. So let's move on to talk about the solutions to these barriers. So now let's get into the solutions for those barriers. And here are some ideas. And this is just a sampling. I'm sure there are more than what are listed here. These are things to think about in all different settings and situations. So to start, the physical barrier. The solution to these physical barriers would be ramps, elevators, railings, flexible seating, carpet, headphones, braille, any of those types of things can be helpful to provide greater access and inclusion for students. Also, we have the mindset barrier. And how do we overcome this barrier? Well, one solution is teaching about disability inclusion and disabled individuals, current and historical, as well as disability rights. It's actually the law here in New Jersey. There's a statute that requires that a Board of Education has to make sure that instruction on the political, economic, and social contributions of persons with disabilities is included in the curriculum of middle and high school students. So if you are in a SEPAG, or even if you're not, you want to reach out to your school district and find out, are they teaching these things, helping with the mindset of the population in the district. And it's good for students and faculty, right? Everybody has to work on these mindset, this changing the mindset and being more inclusive. All right, the next barrier, misinformation that we talked about. What are the solutions? Well, having those conversations in the IEP meetings about starting the placement in the general education classroom. Also, sharing information in parent-teacher conferences and SEPAG meetings and PTA meetings and back to school nights and orientation, as many different places as you can, talking about what inclusion looks like and what is best practices. And then also is the climate and culture barrier, and how to overcome that. And one way is to have your special education parent advisory group out in the community, in school and beyond, creating opportunities for the community to see parents of special education students talking about what they have experienced, and answer questions about anything that's related to special education, providing spaces that are sensory friendly for families when they go to events, providing interpreters, translated materials, and then sharing information to building administration on best practices, who can then share it with their teachers. It's a really an effort that is, in terms of climate and culture, it's an effort that everyone has to get behind.
So we've talked about the barriers to inclusion, and the next piece is to understand the data and where to find the data and how the data can help tell a story. Add that storytelling to the identifying the barriers, and then you get a more rich conversation as a CPAG as you're trying to navigate your way in creating change and creating more inclusive opportunities and extending inclusion beyond your school district and into your community. The first report I want to talk about is the New Jersey School Performance Report, which can be found on the New Jersey Department of Education website. The New Jersey Annual School Performance Report provides valuable insights into school performance, engages parents, students, and communities in understanding educational outcomes, helps to identify strengths and areas for improvement within schools. And it provides specific information such as school and district overview, demographic information, student growth, academic achievement, college and career readiness, graduation and post-secondary information, school climate and environment information, staff information, school accountability, and then there's a section on school and district narrative information. Discussing the data at a SEPAG meeting can generate impactful parent input that can help in collaborating with the district on improving outcomes for all students. The second piece of data that's important from the New Jersey Department of Education is the Educational Environment Dashboard. Under IDEA, each state is required to collect and report data on placement in the least restrictive environment. It enables districts to drill down and review data and empowers districts to identify trends and make decisions that inform funding, resource allocation, professional development, to name a few. Again, it's taking this information as a SEPAG, reviewing it, and engaging your district in conversations that can impact outcomes for all students. When we put the pieces together, we get a story, and that story can shape how you turn your SEPAG into a catalyst for change. But to make change, you have to look beyond the classroom. Sure, you start small with change, but it doesn't hurt to think bigger about the impact of actions. The stories, experiences, and input behind the data make the most compelling data.
So now we're going to have a little activity here, and it's called Check Your Knowledge, True or False. And I will put up the statement, and then you can think about whether it's true or false, and then I'll reveal the answer. All right, so the first one is the word inclusion is mentioned in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Is that true or false? This is something that we talked about at the beginning of the session today. False. It is actually not included in IDEA. There's no mention of inclusion. LRE means least restrictive environment and is included in IDEA. True or false? That is true. And that is, when we're thinking about inclusion in IDEA, it is actually least restrictive environment. So providing the opportunity for a student with a disability to be in the general education setting with their non-disabled peers, right? That's the least restrictive environment and the starting place for a student with disability. The starting point for any disabled student is their most restrictive setting. True or false? False, right? It's actually just what I said before in the previous statement. It's their least restrictive setting that is the starting point, not their most restrictive. Next one, next statement. New Jersey ranks third in the United States on its delivery of education in the least restrictive environments. True or false? The answer is false. New Jersey actually ranks 50th in the United States on its delivery of education in the least restrictive environments. That's correct. We are last in this. Terrible shame. And finally, a statute in New Jersey mandates that middle and high school students are to be taught about the contributions of disabled individuals. True or false? This is true. This is true. They are mandated to learn about contributions of disabled individuals in middle or high school. Thank you for playing.
We discussed the barriers and the data to help guide you in creating a roadmap for your SEPAG in identifying gaps and discussing solutions for change. A SEPAG is many things: a hub for information, a source of camaraderie for parents and caregivers, and also a catalyst for change. If your SEPAG wants to make an impact and be a catalyst for more inclusive opportunities, you have to examine each area and see how your group can impact change. But how? Well, let's start with the classroom. How is staff in the classroom creating an inclusive environment? How are all students feeling included? At the building level, how is the principal setting the culture and climate of the building? It has been said that everything falls at the principal's feet. So how are they ensuring inclusive opportunities for all students? The district level, your superintendent and even decisions made by your Board of Education impact inclusion. Are board members reviewing the data? Are they hearing the parents' input? And lastly, what does inclusion look like in your community? Who are your group's supporters? How can your CPAG make change in the community?
All right, so now let's take a moment to stop and think, go back to those barriers that we talked about. How does that look when we think about inclusion extending beyond the classroom? And how are we preparing all children for an inclusive community? What role can you play in helping to facilitate an inclusive community? Keep asking questions is one of the ways, right? Knowing there are barriers also presents opportunities for solutions as discussed earlier. How are we preparing all children? What are we doing to address the issues? Are you reaching out to community leaders? Sadly, the barriers do exist beyond the classroom, and that is why we often say that the work of an inclusive culture and climate is not a one-person job, but rather the job of all. It is about collective action. Okay, so let's talk about how your CPAG can move from input to action, starting with identifying solutions at parent meetings. Always be in a solution-minded space when you are talking about ways to make in a more inclusive setting or environment. Use some of the examples that we have, or have your own examples on ways you can make things more inclusive. We talked about the barriers. What are the solutions? Inviting the community to attend your events, right? In making this about inclusion is also making it about everyone. It's not, we're trying to get away from the silos. It's not about the special education people over there doing their meeting and everybody else doing theirs. It's coming together and talking about solutions and steps you can take to make more inclusive environments. Having a presence in the community, taking your table out to the health fair, going into community events, being at town hall meetings, making your presence known because your children are in the community, right? That is what a inclusive community looks like, is for everyone to be there together. So establishing a presence, participating at Board of Ed meetings, talking about what's going on in your CPAG in a public speaks or public comments, having a presentation for the Board of Ed members so that they understand. We go back to the mindset. If people aren't experiencing firsthand special education and IEP meetings, they're not thinking about it. So going in and talking about it and helping people understand what's going on, and especially Board of Ed members who are there to represent and talk about the district for everyone, it's really helpful. And we have a template presentation that you are welcome to use. And then the connectors. And so if you're in a school district with more than one school, having parent liaisons at those schools, even one at each school, or you can have co-liaisons, but the parent liaison of the school is then the point person for any parent that needs to talk to another parent about special education or questions about the process. Or just somebody who gets it, right? It's nice to talk to somebody else who understands and who has gone through it before. The parent liaison can also be somebody that contacts the building administration and the principal and assistant principal and sits down with them and says, this is my role here, is to help parents understand and be an ear for them. Also letting the child study team know about the CPAG, and participating in PTA meetings and doing a report about when the next meetings are, the CPAG meetings are. And then, of course, to collect input, if there's input from parents in the school, so that it can be shared back with the CPAG leaders so that they can see if there's a systemic issue, if they need to raise it. So parent liaisons are those connectors and really helping to spread the word about CPAGs. Evolving students, sharing stories and lived experience. There is nothing greater than hearing the experience from somebody who has had it firsthand, right? So providing opportunities for students to be able to share their stories if they'd like to. It's It's an important aspect of creating an inclusive community is that you're including those people who are experiencing it. So now we're going to try this for your specific group. Here's some ideas to get you started now, especially as you're going into the new school year for next year, right? You can end this year and then think about what your mission statement and goals are for next year. Look at your own SEPAG engagement to make sure that you're connecting with all families, and what do you need to do to help ensure that. Connect with other parent groups to raise awareness, and reach out to community leaders and organizations and share flyers and request meetings so everyone knows about the SEPAG and the work that you're doing. And you might have some of your own ideas too.
When we think about a SEPAG being a champion for change and a catalyst for inclusive districts and communities, think about this. SEPAG can help foster a sense of shared responsibility. A SEPAG can identify concerns in a solutions-focused way. SEPAG can be the bridge through resources, events, and actions. And a SEPAG can lead by example by being inclusive. We hope that you gained some tools to help you understand the value and importance of an inclusive district and community, and the vital role that a SEPAG can play in achieving it. Thank you for joining us. We are the START Project at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. Take care.